It doesn't matter what kind of e-commerce brand you're building, you still need a rock-solid way to grow and scale your company like clockwork. Welcome to 7 Figures and Beyond, an e-commerce marketing podcast for D2C brand owners and marketers looking for best practices that include proven strategies and tactics to grow an e-commerce brand to 7 figures and beyond. Bringing 18 plus years of marketing experience as an e-commerce brand owner and e-commerce agency owner, please welcome your host, Greg Shuey.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 7 Figures and Beyond e-commerce marketing podcast. I hope that everyone is having a fabulous day. So today's topic that we are going to be diving into has not really been discussed on the podcast before. We've touched on it in a couple of places, but haven't gone deep. So should be a really fun discussion. It's also something that I don't know a lot about. And so I'm just excited from like a student standpoint to be able to learn from our guest today. My guest today, his name is Chris Porteous, and he is the founder and CEO of a company called SearchEye. SearchEye helps brands grow through publisher collaborations, securing placements that no one else can. These unique placements not only help supercharge your SEO, but they're also designed to build a strong brand awareness that supports all of your other marketing channels. It's one of the things that I really love about online PR. But that's not all. Chris and his team at SearchEye have set an ambitious goal to build an ad marketplace that's layered on top of organic content, effectively helping anyone with an audience monetize their content. Pretty cool. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that. Our topic today, guess what? I mean, you can probably guess, it's going to be about online PR. It's going to be specifically about how to scale your brand's reach with automated online PR. And yes, you heard that right, automated. I didn't even really know automation in PR was a thing. So historically, PR has been known to take so much time and effort, making it incredibly costly and out of reach for a lot of brands, especially smaller brands. So we're really here to unpack how automation can transform this landscape. It's going to be an awesome discussion. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
Cool. Well, the first question I ask everyone is to take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to our listeners and really help them understand where you're coming from, your personal story, and what has led up to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take a step back there.
Yeah.
But don't worry, it'll all come together. Kind of like, I think Donald Trump calls that the weave. And so my background is actually in finance.
Okay.
So I had the opportunity of working at Goldman Sachs and UBS Securities during my co-op terms. Loved it. That was all during kind of like the 2008 recession. So not an easy time. But during this time, when I was actually trying to go into the job market after university, I created a like macro finance niche Canadian blog. And what I was doing was working with other publishers across the web that were in the finance space, pitching myself, doing it to get more kind of audience and attraction with people hiring. And I didn't really realize at the time what I was effectively doing was SEO or PR. I grew that site to something like 30 to 50,000 visitors a month.
That's awesome.
Just on the back of writing content and then
Good
getting
SEO
to print it. And I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
Anyways, I got my first job after university in the structured finance space, creating or helping rate those fun, asset-backed security products that everyone loves from the 2008 recession. And a few years later, a colleague, a friend of mine, that I was working on another project with in a cardboard furniture space, asked me, a law firm he was doing PR for, he's like, do you want to do SEO for this law firm? At the time, they were a small local law firm in Toronto, and now they're one of the largest in Canada. So obviously, I Googled, what is SEO? And I'm like, I could totally do this. And this was back 7-8 years ago when you could work remote. And at the time, I was working like 70, 80 hours. I'm like, this is going to be 50, 60 hours. I'm like, oh, similar pay, less hours, work remote. I'm like, this is the dream. I can, totally do this. And so when I started there, again, my background being in finance and ops, the first thing I did was really first understand the space. And then I built a scalable system. So I hired an engineer somewhere out of India at the time. It's all I could afford.
Yep.
to basically build a system to track all the publishers that I have relationships with. So I was reaching out manually to other law firms, other blogs, mommy blogs, things like that.
Yeah.
And like, I had it in a sheet. I'm like, let's put this into a database. And then from there, I started automating. Hey, I have 10,000 sites in my database. System, pick 10 a month that have these specs, and then task that all out in Asana.
Yeah.
So I built especially like a task management for link building and kind of automated the full process at that point. I had a writer doing the content. And then we were producing 10, 20, 30 links a month, and I kept on scaling that. And as a result, it became number one in the space. Completely crushed it, expanded across Canada, all in the backs of search.
Yeah.
And so as I was scaling that, we brought in more clients. The results were great. I was never great at account management. And so I'm like, how can I like make this self-serve? And effectively, that's how SearchEye came about. So we started as kind of like a link building PR placement agency we fully productize that. And now that's where we are today.
That's amazing. That's a wild story. Finance to marketing agency owner to this software company. That's cool.
It's a transition. I think anyone who's gone through it, transitioning an agency to a product, at least to me anyways, like we raised a pre-seed last year for it. It's been the hardest thing I think I've ever done because you have such a different culture. You have like people on the agency side running in one direction. You have people on the product side running in another. Both sides don't like each other. Product's trying to automate the agency. The agency's the one bringing in the money. And it just creates a lot of friction there. So it took us a long time to get the whole team kind of in one place and running in the same direction.
It's awesome. Cool. Very cool. I love hearing people's stories and histories and how that all comes to fruition. All right. Are you ready to jump in? Talk about PR?
I thought that was it. I thought we were good to go. Love it. Absolutely. Let's get started.
Cool. So for our listeners who are new to online PR, they've maybe heard it, they've done a little bit of research. Walk us through how in the past traditional PR has worked, what that process looked like, etc. And then help us to understand how that has evolved over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think PR is kind of going through the same timeline now as anything else. Like you think back to like the taxi industry, and they had a monopoly in local markets. That's being broken down. Hotels have monopolies in their markets. That's been broken down with Airbnb and other platforms. And I think PR is kind of going through that maybe a bit later because it has always been more of an exclusive product for well-financed companies. So it was available to, you think of like the Mad Men days, right? Like big budgets out in New York, fancy suits, charging 10, 20, 30,000 a month without necessarily guaranteeing results. And so it just was never that attractive to smaller companies. Like if you're an e-commerce brand and you had a $30,000 budget a month, if you were to spend that on PR, your returns would be abysmal. Like you would blow through that. You may have nothing to show for it. It's very fleeting as well. You have to consistently do it month after month after month. Whereas with paid ads, you can really measure that.
Right.
Now the ROAS and everything else, I think there's some challenges there. We're seeing hits, that's dropping. But generally speaking, PR has never been a great investment for small businesses. So taking back to like traditional PR, it is really built around like exclusivity or gated relationships. Let's say I want to get into the press or certain media outlets. I had to hire a PR agency.
Right.
And I had to work with them. And so you're paying for that relationship. This firm would not only, help put together the strategy, the press release, but the main value was like that distribution. It was helping you get into those really coveted media placements.
Absolutely. And that takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of effort, right? That 30,000 doesn't just go towards building offers and creative and those types of things. A lot of it's built into like, we've got to go build a relationship with someone in this news outlet. And that's going to take time. That's going to take nurturing. So walk me through like what your point of view is on the key benefits of really automating the PR process for brands, e-commerce and not e-commerce, right? Especially those who are trying to look to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. When we looked at this entire kind of process, we talked to hundreds of PR agencies. We talked to hundreds of outreach agencies when we were building our product. And first of all, on the PR side, I don't want to discount the value of what they offer.
Sure.
Like you said, maintaining relationships is very expensive.
Yeah.
Finding new relationships, prospecting. Maybe you built a relationship at the Huffington Post and they went under, or Vice, or whoever it is, or a writer moves from one place to the next. It's really difficult and it is really challenging.
Yeah.
And so like kind of getting back to your question here around that like PR process, the first thing we looked at and our goal is like, how do you democratize this? And so ignoring the kind of like process, automations, workflow altogether, how do you work with publications so anyone has access to them? And I don't mean you could be like a small widget company trying to get onto New York Times. That doesn't make sense. So really, really working with the publishers to understand if you were to like work with a brand, maybe you wanted to get a quote, maybe you're talking about, I don't know, the AI space and you want to talk to an AI expert, or in your case, maybe they're trying to learn more about e-commerce. There's an article coming up around that. And they're like, we need to talk to someone like Greg, who understands this inside and out. How do we better match the right brands and experts with the right publications? In the past, people have tried to do this. I know there's Haro, which is now Connectively featured, and a few others. But effectively, they're not a matchmaking service. It's more of like a listicle where you pick the ones you want and you send them a message. So what happened was, if you're New York Times and you're working on an article around e-com, you might be competing with 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. Yeah. How does the New York Times sort through that, and how do they find the right expert? And so like the value that we want to bring is, how do we make this as seamless as possible for publishers? And how do we make sure we're connecting the right brands with the right publications? So the first step is like, how do we get those publications on and tell them, hey, anyone we send your way, they're going to be vetted. They're going to go, they've been through that process. We know they're the right fit based on all of your criteria.
They're a legit company. They're a right fit. Yeah.
Exactly. And now with AI, that's become much easier to analyze businesses in real time and basically make sure it's a match based on the requirements of the publisher. So the first step was effectively in automating. How do we get the right publications on and really understand what is considered a good match? Yeah.
That's awesome. That cuts out a lot of time and work on the advertiser side. I guess that's what you're referring to them as, the advertiser side?
Yeah, we call them brands.
Brand side. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Exactly. And then how do we make it one click? So you're like, oh, New York Times is working,
boom.
You're Greg, you're at Stride. New York Times is looking for an e-com expert. We know based on your entire background, your LinkedIn, your website, this is a really great match. It meets all the requirements.
It's awesome. Very cool. Okay, so for brands who are just getting started with online PR, besides going out and just signing up for SearchEye, which is obviously the first thing that they should do, what are some of those first steps that they need to take so that they are prepared to go down this path as a strategy? And then how can they build on those foundations as they start to grow?
Yeah, I generally consider PR, even now, as a luxury. I know that definition is changing. Like PR can mean influencer marketing. It can mean getting in lists and articles. Like it has a quite wide-ranging definition. Yeah. But the first thing I always ask, like, is this the right channel for you? We come from like the SEO side, and SEO isn't always the best channel. Like for e-commerce brands, there might be much better opportunities with Facebook, with Google Ads, things like that, and other paid opportunities where they can directly measure that return on ad spend. And so generally companies that work with us or brands that work with us, if we have like a call or kind of go through that discovery process, it's more around, what are you doing right now? If this is your only avenue of marketing, I don't think it's the best fit. Yeah. This is one of those things where, hey, I really want to start scaling now. Hey, we're starting to see traction here. We're happy with where our revenue growth is at. how do we now start building a lasting brand that's not just built on the backs of different platforms?
Yeah, I like that. And in our last episode, we talked a lot about the importance of building brand versus just like digging in and leaning on one or even two specific channels to be able to grow the business. Is you've got to be out there, you've got to be brand building, because that is going to be the backbone and the foundation of everything that you're doing. And then everything builds upon that, your SEO, your ad campaigns and whatnot. So I like that for sure. So kind of switching gears, when I hear the word automation, and I know when other people hear that word, they immediately start thinking about, okay, quality and personalization. Like, how do I maintain high quality? And how do I personalize to make sure that, I'm connecting with the right people, with the right message and those types of things? So walk me through that. When you start to automate and do this at scale, how do you manage both of those?
For sure. So if you look at kind of the entire process end to end, the first step is prospecting. Or even before that, it's like, what are we trying to do? What are our goals? Are we trying to get into lists? Are we trying to get our brand featured? Am I trying to get quoted as a thought leader? Really kind of understanding that. And what do I want to accomplish from this?
Yeah.
So like once you understand that piece, then naturally move on to, if you think of like, what we're trying to do effectively is automate the outreach process, which is prospecting, emailing, pitching, and then effectively back and forth communication, and then published.
Yeah.
Each one of those steps is quite tiresome and tedious.
Yep.
Now with SearchEye, where we've really invested on the tech side, we think about like onboarding. The easier it is for a publisher to onboard, and the easier it is for a publisher to put in all of their criteria. For example, let's say we're onboarding a blog in the travel space.
Yeah.
If they can get onboarded and verified within a few minutes, and we can do that at scale, we can then, as a brand who wants to get onto travel sites, they're going to have more access to really great publications. We're going to know that these are the exact requirements of the publication. So we're only showing the right publications to the right brands. Because if you think of outreach, you don't have that information.
Yeah.
If you're working with a client of yours and you're outreaching to 1,000 sites, even if it's hyper personalized, you don't understand the needs of the publication.
Yeah.
Even if you message them and say, hey, we're looking to do this, and this, or this would be really good for your audience, they could be like, no, you don't fit our requirements already. So if we collect the right requirements, you're only seeing the right ones. So that's already streamlining the prospecting process. And then because we have the direct relationship with the publisher, we also streamline the contact that you're working with.
Yep.
So now you're not trying to find the right contact, or you're mass messaging 5-10 people at a publication. We've streamlined that. We know the exact same. We know the right person. We know exactly the messaging we need to send to them to get something approved. They understand the process and the platform.
Yeah.
So even though that's automated, we've already taken out 60 to 80% of the really difficult work.
Got it.
From it. And then as we kind of work through the process for the pitches, we built what's called Pitch AI, which takes all the needs of, basically creates like a knowledge graph.
Yeah.
Your brand and yourself, and a knowledge graph of the publisher. And it basically takes the two and says, what's a really great story that meets the requirements of what you're ordering? So it could be a full feature. So we take all these requirements that we have internally that you wouldn't have access to as a brand,
Yeah.
to come up with a story that we know will get accepted. And so what we're really doing is just taking the requirements and collecting the right requirements and matchmaking at that point. So it's automated, but it's not automated PR. It's not in the way that, hey, I have $100,000, get me on 100 publications or 200 publications at scale. It's like we've done all the heavy lifting. And so you can come in and say, I want to get mentioned here and I want to promote this product. And then we take care of the rest because we understand both sides. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. For brands that are just getting started, like what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see them make?
For me, it's really the outreach side. the industry is changing, marketing is changing all the time. And a lot of the tactics that people are taking, especially with AI now, I think outreach has become hyper competitive. And so and that's what we're trying to solve as a publication. You've gone from maybe 10 good pitches a day to 500.
Crappy pitches that were all produced by ChatGPT.
Yeah, when I say good, it's a low bar. But probably like if 10 pitches were really good and done by hand by a PR agency or someone who specializes in outreach, they're getting lost in the mix with hundreds of others. Think about like LinkedIn, when they added that feature where you can one-click apply for a job. That's actually, it sounds great, but it makes things worse for everybody.
Right.
Because there's no curation behind that. So now that same job, because you can one-click it, I can one-click it. I'm like, oh, I'll apply to like 500 jobs today.
Yep.
And next, you know, like you're trusting their algorithms or however they decide what is a good or not a good candidate to make that decision. So that's generally the mistake I see is with outreach is kind of like a spray and pray approach or with PR. And I think it really makes things worse for the entire industry.
So on the flip side, how do you stand out? Like, what are some tips that you have to help people stand out from those 500 AI created pitches?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to plug SearchEye here. I mean, you go into SearchEye, one click, and then we kind of handle all of that for you. But really, if you think about if anyone can do something in a certain way, if now the bar to emailing to finding a contact, like with AI, you can build these agents that, you know, find me 100 sites in this space.
Yep.
Find me the contacts, send an email, and you can do that all in one click.
Yeah.
It just means everyone can do that same process in one click. And so it's really, and it's always been this way. How do you stand out? And, you know, people were sending custom messages on LinkedIn, but now that's gotten, again,
spam.
Diluted, the same problem. And so even for us, like if we think how we get publishers on our platform, the best publications we work with, I fly everywhere. Like when I was in Austin, I brought on 10 or 15 publishers because I met with them for coffee or at South by, or even even bars. Like I don't know how much people like that, but I'm talking to someone like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, that's really cool. And I would love to be a publisher. And that's a relationship that they would never ordinarily be interested in this. But when you kind of walk them through it, they're like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah. So if you think about the process, like if you do things in the same way that everyone else is doing, it becomes a numbers game where it's like, okay, if I send 1,000 emails, hope I get 10 responses.
Yep.
But if you're out at a restaurant, you're out with friends, or you're like, oh, I know a friend of a friend, connect through them and build more personal relationships, you're going to have much more success.
Sure. And I think long-term success too, right? You can come back around and use some of those same publishers that you have really strong relationships with. I think that's very valuable for a brand.
Exactly.
Can you share with us like a case study or an example of where automated PR like really helped boost a brand's reach and growth?
Yeah, like we have case studies on our website. There is one brand in particular. I don't know if they know it, but they were one of our first clients on the SearchEye platform. And at the time, they raised like a seed round. They had a small spend with us on kind of PR and call it links, but on PR and links. Not a lot of volume at the time. I think they were maybe doing 500,000 searches a month, give or take. Yeah. And they were in like the LLC finance space. And basically, they were spending X with us a month. And from there, they're getting some placements. They saw kind of their brand grow. They saw clicks through. They saw like return from it. Saw traffic, especially from the search perspective, because they were building authority, start to ramp up. And they're like, hey, like, let's double it. Great. Let's double it again in a few months. And they kept on kind of doing that. And then at one point, he's like, hey, if we like 5x our budget, like, what can we do? And so this strategy, like over time, because they started early with a small budget to build authority, they started to see like a return on the investment quite quickly.
Yeah.
And with PR, with SEO, the return is much higher because it's compounding growth.
Yeah.
Like if you think of a typical campaign over time, you're going to grow. Whereas with, paid channels, it's you get what you pay for.
You're
And
renting
you
that
want something
space and you get what you pay for that day.
100%. So they realized early on, like we can build a moat around this by producing really great third-party content. We got them, featured on NASDAQ.
Yeah.
Got the mentions in HubSpot, like really big publications. And they just saw so much value from that. And because they started small and ramped up spend, they always had a positive kind of, I know it's a bit different, but positive return on ad spend in effect there.
Yeah. Awesome.
And I think they maybe 200x traffic
Oh my gosh.
over the 2 years
Yep.
just through this.
Awesome. That's amazing. So let's talk about the future, right? 2025 is kind of knocking down our door here in just a minute. We continue to see ChatGPT dominate. We've got lots of other AI tools out there. And as we're learning is that consumers in general are kind of changing the way that they consume content and media. So where do you think audiences for brands will come from in the future? And what are the ramifications for brands as time goes on next year?
Yeah, for sure. I find that really, really interesting. When we were going through the pre-seed, that was the most common question. Like, and the way we pitched ourselves was connecting brands with publications.
Yeah.
So investors immediately thought of traditional PR,
Cool tool, but how is that going to work for us next year and beyond?
Exactly. And if you want to build a lasting business, even with our product, there's always going to be, I know there is right now an attack on organic marketing.
Yeah.
That to me does scare me. If I think of TikTok, even I think of Google, what they're doing with ChatGPT. But at the same time, it's also really exciting.
Yeah.
I think the search space, like just kind of taking a 40,000 foot view here, it's growing exponentially.
Yep.
Maybe that's not through Google. Google's been relatively flat they've still even seen like a slight increase in search, but I think the overall space continues to grow. So even though there is, I think, an attack on small brands, organic marketing is getting tougher and tougher. Yep. I do think the market is growing exponentially to the point where right now organic might be between 90 and 95% of all spend or of all reach.
Yeah. That
might come down to 70, 75%, let's say, but the overall market is growing so quickly that it kind of negates that. So I think of like platforms. Right now there is a platform shift from Google, traditional search, even TikTok. Like I think the future of video is going to change. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me if someone's creating AI content and then distributing it. Why isn't TikTok doing that? Like I could see a world where automated personal videos are created just for you.
Yeah.
And that's not driven by creators, but driven by AI. But we're also seeing, if you look at some of the most viral videos, if you look at some of the best content on the web, someone like Mr. Beast on the social side, it is ultimately, as the quality gets better and better, I think that's what's leading to an increase in the size of these spaces. But the ones who stand out are always going to be the ones who curated really creative ideas. Because you think of like LLMs, they're looking backwards and kind of making projections versus let's continue to build really cool strategies that no one's ever done before. So I do think right now there is an attack on organic search and organic marketing in general, but the space is growing so quickly. There's going to be much more personalization.
Yeah.
And so that's always going to lead to opportunities for e-commerce brands. I think it's going to be much tougher where you're going to have to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Much more consistently.
Yep, I agree. I think brands are going to have to continue to invest more money every year into marketing. They're going to have to really rely on brand building, community building, and then layer in the different channels, your SEO, AI optimization. Is that what they're calling it these days? AIO?
AIO, it's going to, I'm sure that'll change. Yeah, even thinking through all this, like what's really exciting, I mean, it's going to be much more challenging, but because the industry is getting much more decentralized, in the past, you would hire someone to, handle your SEO.
Yep.
Effectively meant market me on Google or help me scale my brand on Google. The one thing each of these platforms have in common, and this hasn't generally changed over even the last 1,000 years, is brand matters.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there was a period 10, 15 years ago where someone without a brand could show up organically with ease. That generally is changing quite a bit. The biggest brands are getting more visibility, are owning their own audience, whether that's through email newsletters, having their own podcasts like yourself. Building your brand is becoming more and more important. And that's the one constant across any platform. Big brands on TikTok are doing well. Big brands on Google are doing well. Small brands could do well, but it's much more volatile.
Yep. Could do well, volatile, and it just takes a considerable more amount of investment and time in order to be able to do that.
Exactly. Even clients that you're working with, I'm sure it's hey, let's pick a few channels and do that really, really well versus let's here's 20 different channels that have audiences. Let's try to do something on each just for exposure.
Yeah.
One's going to be much more effective than the other.
Yep. And then getting stretched too thin is just a recipe for disaster and zero growth.
Exactly.
Oh, awesome. Well, any final thoughts?
No, it's just I encourage everyone. I think generally people see PR as very, very scary. I think the move towards more decentralization is going to make it more accessible to brands.
Yeah.
And brands can come on who maybe are spending, even if it's a few $1,000s on TikTok, will actually find that PR now, because of its accessibility and because of what we're trying to do to democratize it, can come on. They can spend a few dollars to really test it out and see and learn if it's the right channel for them without making a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month commitment.
It's awesome. Well, I'm gonna let you do one last plug for SearchEye. For brands that are just getting started, what do packages look like? What does average cost look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the time for this. Basically, we're a marketplace, so you come onto the platform. You can sign up for free. You can see all these really great articles that are currently being written by publishers that you can get embedded in, and it's one click. You basically pay for each deliverable, and it starts anywhere between $150 for a brand mention up to, for some of the larger publications, it could be a few thousand.
And that's the free plan. And then I know that you have some paid plans.
Yeah, exactly. So with our paid plans, it's more around the service offering. So if you're looking for something more custom, maybe you're a shoe brand and you're looking to get published on a lifestyle site. You can come on, you can find, see our entire inventory of thousands and thousands of publishers. We sort everything by relevance, get mentioned, and then we'll actually work with you to craft a custom pitch and a custom article that plugs your brand into that content.
That's amazing. Awesome. Cool. Well, if you haven't heard of SearchEye, go check it out. We'll make sure to include Chris's LinkedIn in the show notes, as well as SearchEye. So you can easily click on that and get over to the website and look around and get signed up. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Well, I know that we've learned a lot of really amazing things. So make sure that you carve out some time over the next few weeks. You really kind of dial into one or two of those. Just like stretching your marketing budget too thin, you can get stretched too thin. So pick a couple of those, get focused, double down, and start executing. Thank you so much for joining.